Hey guys, Tutu here with a serious analysis for you today. This time it's going to be Trump versus Jab from round one of the Americas Championships. And this match is very, very important because the winner goes on to the final round of their specific group and is one win away from qualifying for Blizzcon, while the loser falls down to the lower bracket and has to go 2-0 in order to be able to qualify. So both players definitely preparing a lot for this match and wanting to win it pretty badly, I would say. This is actually the third match that I'm going to go over featuring Trump. And it's not just for the clicks, don't worry. It's also because he just happens to be involved in very interesting and thought-provoking matches. And the last two matches I did went all the way to the maximum number of games, and this one happens to as well. Sorry for the spoiler. And the opponent obviously is very, very important as well. Previously, he went against Firebat. Now he's going against Jab, who is a really good player in his own right. So one of the reasons why I wanted to go over the series in particular, other than the players involved, is the decks that they brought. And they brought very unique decks, as particularly for such an important tournament like this. Typically, players like to bring the strongest decks. In particular, Tice bought the three strongest decks, that being Patron Warrior, Demon Handlock, and Midrange Druid, and that led to him winning the Europe Championship. And the reason why people think those decks are the strongest is because it does it's either a 50-50 matchup or better against most decks, at least most popular decks out there. And three of the most refined decks out there, most consistent tech choices as far as what to put in the deck as well. Now, Jab and Trump both brought Druid, but the other two decks differed a bit. So I might as well go over Druid first of all, just to let you know why they brought the Druid instead of these other two decks. And the reason why you bring Druid is because with the addition of Darnassus Aspirin after TGT came out, it allowed Druid to be that much better against aggro and things with annoying, mechanics in them like secrets. So previously, in order to deal with those types of decks, they had to tech in things like Kazan and maybe things like, mind control tech. Whereas Darnassus allows them to not have to put in those tech cards and compromise the quality of their deck. So Darnassus does two things. It deals with secrets very well and deals with early aggro very well, as well as being a threat for basically any deck out there. They want to kill that Darnassus so that the Druid doesn't ramp up very, very well. And the reason why it does well against the secrets is because obviously you can play it out against a mirror entity, and it makes it so your opponent basically loses a mana, which is obviously pretty strong. And against something like a freezing trap, you can attack it in, and it basically turns it into a wild growth because the death rattle doesn't go off. Also, it does very, very good combat against smaller minions, so that's why it can work in that situation as well. Now, as far as the decks that Jab brought outside of that, he actually brought two decks which are actually decent against Druid, two of the only decks that are decent against it, that being the Midrange Hunter and the Tempo Mage. Actually, Trump brought a Midrange Paladin, which is decent against it as well. Basically, the only three decks that are at least slightly favored against Druid. So you can kind of see where they're going with that. But in any case, Jab brought that Midrange Hunter, and Midrange Hunter, other than Druid and Demon Handlock, which obviously I mentioned before are two of the strongest decks right now, doesn't really do too well against the other decks in the meta. But the fact that it does well against those two means that even though it's not the strongest deck overall, it's a really good deck to bring in this situation because of the fact that it counters two of the strongest decks in the meta, and you're definitely going to see one, if not both, of you from your opponents in this situation. So that's part of the reason why Jab brought it. Another reason why is because Jab is very, very comfortable with Midrange Hunter, and typically you can, if you're really, really comfortable and you're really good at playing a deck, then you can lift up those percentages a decent amount if you just know every single situation possible. And the third deck that Jab brought was the Tempo Mage. Obviously, it's good against Druid, which is a reason by itself to bring it, and it's reasonable against everything else. Its one weakness is it's slightly bad against Handlock. It used to be kind of bad against Patron as well, but with the addition of Flame Strike, that changed the matchup quite a bit. So as far as Trump is concerned, other than Druid, he brought the Control Warrior and he brought Midrange Paladin. Now, I do like the Midrange Paladin include. Partly because again it's good against the druid, but also because it's the tech cards that he put in allows it to be good against handlock as well. In particular, he had two equalities in his mid-range paladin, and he also had a Justicar, and that puts a lot of pressure on the handlock, particularly because they can't put huge walls up. They had to put one thing at a time, and when they put one thing at a time up, it allows the paladin to basically deal with your board, because that's what paladins basically does. They like to like make those dudes. They like to do things slowly, do things one at a time, and deal with things one at a time. Obviously, they can deal with huge swaths with a quality consecrate or a quality just by itself. But without those pieces, basically the rest of the paladin kit deals with things one at a time, especially with weapons, etc. So that basically it forces the handlock to play into the paladin's hands. And the other thing is that the Justicar is a huge pain in the ass for handlock to deal with. Handlock's a bit of a slower deck. They're not going to kill you very, very fast. And they basically have to do their own trading, or else they might get in trouble with things like equality. So they're basically going to be using their big minions typically to be trading with that of the Paladin's minions, and it gives Paladin time to basically play out the Justicar and get the value out of those hero power. And from the handlock, there's only going to be basically 3 AoEs, typically 2 actually, that can deal with huge swaths of the board, and being able to make two Silver Hand Recruits a turn is a huge thing to deal with. Alright, enough about that matchup. Finally, we can go over the Control Warrior. The Control Warrior, I don't super agree with bringing Control Warrior to a situation like this, but it's kind of okay. Obviously, it's favored against the Patron Warrior, as mentioned before. He does have Justicar in it, which helps against things like handlock. It's a bit slower of a handlock deck, as you can see. You can see those 3 pretty high cost minions right there on the screen in his mulligan. So the higher cost minions you have and the more late game you have, the better it's going to do against handlock. And the reason why I brought Justicar up in particular is because Justicar acts kind of like card draw. It makes it so that it's very, very hard for the handlock to kill you, and it makes it so that their threats aren't as threatening. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times you can just ignore minions on your opponent's side of the board if they're not doing too much damage, but obviously you can't do that with a giant. So it's something that you want to deal with right away. But if you have Justicar, you're actually able to kind of stall and not really deal with it right away, or maybe use your like weapons to deal with it, stuff like that. So Justicar actually acts as a bit of card draw, because you're able to draw multiple cards while you're just basically not dying. So that's another tech card that allows it to help in that matchup, and basically swings a lot of matchups that you wouldn't find to be very favorable, like that mid-range hunter that you see Jab have in this matchup. So that's the reason why they brought these decks, and without further ado, we'll go on to this particular game. In part 1, I just went over the decks, and we're going to go over this game right here, and I'm going to go over 2 games each in the next couple of parts. So let's get into it. So I don't know if I mentioned this game. This game was originally casted by Frodan, Savitz, and Reynad, and they did a very good job. So if you want to check that out, go to twitch.tv/playhearthstone, and you can see the original cast of that game, and you can see the timeline right there to help you out. So Trump opened with the Control Warrior, and Jab opened with the Druid. Druid's a pretty obvious deck to open up with, because like I mentioned before, it's pretty good against most things. And Jab may have predicted Trump opening up with this Warrior, particularly because Warrior is again reasonable against mid-range hunter and reasonable against the Tempo Mage. It's just bad against the Druid, so might have been something that Jab was thinking about. And pretty much wins the battle of what deck they open with, as far as that rock paper scissors goes. As far as the hands are concerned, Jab obviously has their Darnassus and the Wild Growth. Definitely makes sense to play Darnassus first in this situation. If he had, say, the Shade of Naxxramas in this hand, it would have been a different decision to make. But even if Trump has the Fire War Axe to kill this right now, then Jab still has the Wild Growth to play next turn. Obviously, if he top decks the Shade, it makes it a little bit more difficult decision. But Trump doesn't have a way to deal with it anyway, and Jab doesn't pick up the Shade anyway, so it doesn't really change anything. Trump really doesn't have any way to deal with it, so he decides to go with the Slam into Acolyte next turn. Jab, as predicted, goes for the Wild Growth. This game actually goes pretty straightforwardly. if that's a normal adjective or adverb, excuse me. And basically, there's only a couple decisions that are really tough slash, there's many lines to go for. In this case, Jab has the ability to go for the Azure Drake Innervate Wrath. It seems pretty painful to go for it. He does eventually go for it, but it seems pretty painful just because it is kind of a 3-for-1 slash 2-for-0 that you're inflicting onto yourself. But looking at his hand, it's pretty small at the moment, and there's no real way to have a huge tempo turn in the future using this Innervate. I mean, it's not like he can play the Shredder and the Druid of the Claw next turn anyway, and since he can't do that next turn anyway, he's going to play one of them, which means that you need to be top decking something in order to make that Innervate viable for a tempo turn later. And obviously the Acolyte of Pain would have killed the Darnassus and would have been something that was annoying sticking in the board as well. So definitely worth it to get that tempo play in right now. And if you eventually draw something like, Ancient of Lore or maybe the second Azure Drake, then that can allow you to basically catch up in cards. And it just allows you to basically keep up the tempo, and that allows you to draw kind of be a pseudo card draw as well, being ahead in tempo, because it allows you that time to put these slower minions onto the board. Now, Trump deliberates about this for a little while, but the obvious play is to go for the slam onto the Drake and then use the Fireworks to kill it. Jab is coming up on 6/5 mana depending, 6/5 mana depending on whether Trump kills off their Darnassus, and 6 mana doesn't really matter too much. It's only the Emperor Thorson that Trump would be worried about. And it's just not that likely that he has it right now. And even if he did, he'd only be discounting 3 cards, so it's not really the biggest deal. And even if he played it, Trump would be able to deal with it with that Shield Slam. So, kills off the Drake as suspected. He used the Fireworks that he didn't top deck. A smart player like Jab might be able to deduce that there are 2 Fireworks in Trump's hand if he used the one that he top decked. Jab actually does a really kind of a quote-unquote cute play right here that doesn't work out for him. The obvious play is to play the Druid of the Claw in taunt form to protect his Darnassus, but he plays this Shredder on curve so he can hero power. Obviously he gets the extra damage in, but what it kind of does is it's inviting Trump to kill the Shredder instead of dealing with the Darnassus, and it makes it seem like, oh, I don't have a 7 mana turn play. Or 7 mana play, so I'm just hoping that you kill the other one, but instead Trump has the Shredder to pretty much deal with this, he has the Sludge Belcher to deal with this Shredder pretty much as well as you can deal with it. So Trump instead goes for that play, and Jab's kind of sad about it and doesn't have any way to play his Ancient Lore. Trump picks up the ability to Shield Slam this Druid of the Claw down. His only other play would be to play Justicar, which doesn't really deal with what's on board, so might as well be able to just deal with his Druid of the Claw and have the board lead again. And deals the Druid of the Claw, goes face. No reason to give the Shredder charge. On the side of Jab, he just goes for the Ancient of Lore. Again, pretty obvious play. And so basically the only non-obvious plays so far have been I guess the Innervate Wrath was pretty obvious, and then the kind of the only off play of the game was playing the Shredder. Trump goes for the Sylvanas right here, which makes sense. Justicar doesn't really contest the board well enough, even though you're getting armor. It's not that big of a deal, especially because Trump probably wants to play something like Grom or go into Ysera or something like that in these coming turns. And Sylvanas provides the most board contention, I should say. It's just kind of the most annoying thing to deal with. Either Jab can deal with it, or he deals with it with using 4 mana, using that Keeper of the Grove. So it definitely makes the most sense for Trump to go for that, to provide the most annoying minion on the board. And obviously you want to get Sylvanas out as early as possible before they're able to combo you down. So again, a good play by Trump. Jab does all he can here, which is just to load the board as much as possible to threaten lethal the next turn. Coming up on 9 mana. Trump doesn't know he has 2 Savage Auras, but he's obviously afraid of something like, the traditional combo. So, Jab just puts both guys on the board, and this is pretty much impossible for Trump to deal with as far as right now this turn, because you can't, kill your own Sylvanas off via something like Shield Slam, because you might take something like a Slime. I guess he could kill off right now and take something reasonable, but in general he can't, hit the Belcher and then kill the Belcher and then like Wrath or something, his own guy. It'd be pretty hard to do that. So he does the best he can, and he plays out the Shield Maiden, as well as the Fiery War Axe. He kills off the entire Sludge Belcher, but it's not enough because Jab has lethal with the 2 Savage Roars anyway. So again, this game, not the most decisions to be made. It's still worth it to go over the series. Don't worry, part 2 and part 3 will be better. It's a very, very entertaining series. But this one in particular is pretty one-sided and pretty, it shows why the Druid is favored in this matchup. Typically because the Warrior is just behind on tempo the entire game and eventually just gets beaten down by the combo. So yeah, pretty normal game between these 2 deck archetypes. Ends up in a Jab win, and yeah, after we see this combo go through and kill Trump, we're going to end this video and part 1, and you can click through to part 2.